Celine Fegat was born on May 23, 1976 in the French town of Besançon. It was a quiet and peaceful place, not far from the Swiss border. Celine grew up in a loving family with her parents, 2 brothers, and a sister. Her dad was a farmer, so she and her siblings spent a lot of time outside, helping him keep the farm running. At school, Celine was active in sports and had many friends. When she was 14, her parents took her to nearby Britain and she absolutely loved it. From that point on, she started thinking about moving there someday. She decided to pursue an education that would allow her to work in the hotel business, inspired by her cousin who was a hotel manager in the UK. After finishing school, enrolled in a local university to study accounting. She also continued visiting her cousin in England whenever she could. One summer, he helped her get a job at a hotel, and she spent a few months working there before returning home. At the end of 1995, when Celine was 19, she decided to travel to Britain again for Christmas. At that time of year, public trains in France were experiencing disruptions, so her parents asked a family friend, a truck driver, for help. He was delivering cargo to England and agreed to give her a ride to a town called Folkestone. From there, Celine planned to travel to Fordingbridge, a town about 150 miles or 250 kilometers away, where her cousin lived. On December 18th, left home, planning to reach her cousin's hotel by that evening. Her parents were expecting a call from her to let them know she had arrived safely, but as the evening stretched on, there was no word from Celine. She didn't have a mobile phone, so all her family could do was just wait and hope she would make it to the hotel eventually. Later that night, they finally got a call, but it wasn't Celine. It was her cousin. He told them she still hadn't arrived and asked if something had changed in her plans. Celine's parents grew even more worried and, with no other options, decided to contact the police. French authorities quickly reached out to their British colleagues, who immediately launched a search for the missing woman. Their first step was to speak with Celine's parents, who traveled to England to assist in the investigation. They told them about a family friend, a truck driver, who had agreed to give Celine a ride to Britain. The police tracked him down and he confirmed that he had dropped her off in Folkestone. After that, he had to head in a different direction. While they were at the truck stop, the driver met another French trucker who was heading to a town called Newbury about an hour's drive from Celine's cousin's hotel. This second driver agreed to give Celine a lift, and investigators managed to locate him as well. He told the police he had dropped Celine off at a truck stop in Newbury. She had tried using a payphone there to call her cousin and ask him to pick her up, but for some reason she couldn't get through. By that time, it was already 4:30 p.m. The driver told Celine she could take a train to her cousin's town, but there was a problem. The nearest station was a few dozen miles away, and he couldn't take her there since he had to deliver his cargo in a different direction. He still wanted to help, so he started asking other truckers in the parking lot if anyone could give Celine a ride. The first driver he asked turned him down, saying he was planning to rest before his next trip, but the second trucker agreed. He said he was heading to Salisbury, just about a 30-minute drive from Celine's cousin's town. He even mentioned she could probably catch an 8 p.m. bus from there. With no other options left, Celine went with the third driver, and that's where her trail disappeared. Detectives tried to track this man down, but they didn't have enough solid information to identify him. The second driver, who had handed her over, couldn't recall the license plate number and only remembered that the truck was a white Mercedes. He also provided a description of the man. He was around 35 years old, had short blonde hair and a beard. The second driver also mentioned that something about this man struck him as suspicious. There was something unsettling about his behavior, but he still let Celine go with him because, at that point, she simply had no other choice. Police began to suspect that the third driver might have been involved in Celine's disappearance. Using the witness's description, they created a composite sketch and shared it with the local media. As for the first two drivers, investigators thoroughly checked their alibis and found solid evidence proving they had been in other locations at the time. Detectives soon uncovered a troubling detail that made them even more suspicious of the third driver. Remember how he told Celine she could catch an evening bus to her cousin's town from Salisbury? Well, it turned out that no such bus existed. investigators wasted no time getting the word out about Celine's disappearance. They shared her story along with a suspect's composite sketch through newspapers and TV. The case quickly grabbed national attention in both Britain and France. It was just days before Christmas, and the disappearance of a young woman during the holiday season struck a chord with the public. On top of that, there were fears that Celine might have fallen victim to a serial killer. Over the past 2 years, several young women had been murdered in the same area. Police believed these cases were linked to a single perpetrator, and now they were worried Celine's disappearance could be connected to him. As a result, the local police launched a full-scale search. Over 100 officers were assigned to the case, along with helicopters and even an airplane to scan the area from above. They concentrated their efforts along the route the third driver was believed to have taken with Celine, but despite all their efforts, they found no trace of her. Unfortunately, the first week of the search yielded no results. Both the police and Celine's family made numerous public appeals, urging anyone who might know something about her whereabouts or the driver himself to come forward. But every lead they followed quickly turned into a dead end. This went on for over a week until the morning of December 29th, when police received a chilling call. A man driving near the town of Worcester had pulled over to adjust his windshield wipers. While walking along the roadside, he noticed something odd partially covered by snow. Curious, he went closer and, to his horror, realized it was a human body. Shaken, he immediately rushed home and called the police. Officers arrived at the scene and found the body of a young woman, but at first they couldn't identify her. Initially, they thought it might be the remains of a local woman who had disappeared after leaving a nightclub, but the theory was quickly ruled out. It wasn't until the following day, December 30th, that police confirmed the body was Celine's. Her cousin was brought in to identify her, sparing her parents the heartbreaking task of doing it themselves. Police quickly noticed one important detail. The highway where Celine's body was found was almost in the opposite direction of where she had been heading. This only strengthened their theory that the truck driver who had given her a ride was likely responsible for her murder. All of Celine's clothing and personal belongings were missing, and officers found no trace of them near the site where her body was discovered. The autopsy revealed multiple bruises and abrasions consistent with heavy blows, as well as evidence of strangulation. Medical examiners also found signs of SA on Celine's body, but there was no biological material that could lead them to the perpetrator. One chilling detail stood out. The examiners determined that Celine's body had likely been left by the roadside only about 24 hours before it was found. With 11 days having passed since her disappearance, detectives speculated that the killer may have kept her alive for most of that time or even transported her body with him. The second driver who had helped Celine mentioned that the suspect's truck was equipped with an industrial freezer, which suggested the killer could have preserved her body at low temperatures for days. Despite all this, the police still had no solid leads on the driver's identity. However, a conversation with Celine's parents revealed an intriguing detail. She had been carrying 2 bottles of champagne as Christmas gifts. These, along with all her other belongings, were never found. It seemed likely that the killer had taken them, which gave investigators a potential new angle to explore. This champagne was a specific French brand that wasn't sold in Britain, making those 2 bottles completely unique in the country. Police decided to use this as leverage and sent information about the bottles to the media, along with photos of identical champagne. They hoped that the perpetrator might have shown them to someone or even shared them with friends or family. But unfortunately, this lead also went nowhere. Without any other leads in hand, investigators decided to take an unprecedented step. Despite the absence of the perpetrator's DNA on the victim's body, in early January of the following year, they initiated the first mass DNA collection in Britain's history. The police focused their efforts on drivers of Mercedes trucks and similar models. This process took over a month, and detectives managed to test more than 5,000 drivers. Most of them willingly provided their samples, but there were some who refused. Investigators put them on a separate list for further scrutiny, thinking that one of those individuals might be the killer. Meanwhile, Celine's case continued to gain widespread attention in both British and French media. The police received thousands of tips and leads, but unfortunately, none of them brought the detectives any closer to catching the killer. This continued until mid-February when one tip finally caught the investigators' attention. A man called the police after seeing the suspect's sketch on the news and said it looked strikingly similar to one of his coworkers, a 36-year-old truck driver named Stuart Little. He also mentioned that Stuart drove a Mercedes truck with a refrigeration unit. This lead prompted detectives to start digging into Stuart's background. The first thing they uncovered was Stuart's extensive criminal history, though it consisted of non-violent offenses. Next, they decided to approach him carefully and ask for a DNA sample, presenting it as a routine part of their investigation involving thousands of drivers across Britain. However, Stuart refused to provide a sample, which only deepened their suspicions. After several more attempts to persuade him, though, Stuart eventually gave in and agreed to the test. As soon as they had his DNA, the police secured a warrant to search his truck. That's when they found their first major evidence: traces of blood on the mattress in the sleeping area and in other parts of the cab. Testing confirmed it was Celine's blood, and that was enough for an arrest. The police also obtained a warrant to search Stuart's house. In his garage, they discovered Celine's personal belongings, the ones she had with her when she disappeared. But that wasn't all. Investigators noticed something odd about Stuart's tachograph, the device truck drivers are required to use by law to track their driving hours. It appeared that on the day Celine's body was dumped, Stuart had deliberately concealed information about his movements. However, he made a mistake. After disposing of the body, he resumed work without filling in the missing data. This created a suspicious gap in his driving log, which detectives believed corresponded to the time he transported Celine's body to the roadside. During his first interrogation, Stuart denied any involvement in the murder, claiming he had never even picked up Celine. But when police brought in the other driver, who identified Stuart in a lineup, his story changed. He now admitted to giving Celine a ride and claimed they had consensual intercourse. As for her belongings found in his garage, Stuart insisted she had simply forgotten them when he dropped her off. Naturally, investigators weren't quick to believe Stuart's story. They continued searching for evidence and soon found a witness who had seen him the day before Celine's body was discovered. The witness spotted Stuart near a warehouse about 50 miles from where the body was found. He was seen starting a fire next to his truck, and it appeared he was burning something. When police confronted Stuart about this, he claimed he'd started the fire to warm up his truck brakes, which had supposedly frozen due to the weather. Officers decided to search the area near the warehouse, and it didn't take long for them to find something disturbing. Underneath a fence, they discovered Celine's underwear. It was stained with her blood. Piecing together all the evidence, investigators came up with the most likely timeline of events. When Stuart picked up Celine, he drove to a secluded area where he assaulted and killed her. Based on the blood evidence found in his truck, they believe Stuart kept her body on the lower bunk in his cab for 10 days while continuing to make deliveries as if nothing had happened. Shockingly, just a week after the murder, Stuart went home to celebrate Christmas with his wife and children, while Celine's body remained just a few yards away in his truck. At some point, he decided to dispose of the body. Investigators found receipts showing Stuart had purchased a shovel, an axe, and a saw, likely with the intention of dismembering her remains. However, for some reason, he abandoned that plan and simply left her body near the roadside. Detectives soon uncovered another chilling detail. The day after Christmas, Stuart gave those 2 bottles of rare French champagne to an acquaintance as a gift. When detectives questioned him about it, Stuart claimed he'd bought the bottles from another French truck driver, but investigators didn't believe a word of it. On top of that, they uncovered another intriguing detail. Stuart had always worn a beard, but he completely shaved it off after the murder, right around the time the suspect sketch started appearing in the news. They also figured out why Celine couldn't reach her cousin when she tried to call him from a payphone. It turned out that the UK had recently changed its phone codes, and Celine had his number written down with the old code in her notebook. Unaware of this update, she dialed the outdated number and her call never went through. For Stuart's family, friends, and co-workers, these revelations were a complete shock. To them, he had always seemed like a devoted family man and a reliable friend. At first, many even refused to believe he could have been involved. But as the media revealed the mounting evidence against him, they had no choice but to face the horrifying truth of who Stewart really was. Stewart's trial began in October of that year, and despite the mountain of evidence against him, he stuck to his story, denying everything. But the jury didn't need long to deliberate. They unanimously found him guilty of murder, and he was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after serving at least 20 years. Soon after his sentencing, Stewart tried to appeal the verdict, claiming that the high-profile nature of the case had biased the jury, preventing him from receiving a fair trial. However, the appeals court rejected his claims. In 2006, Stewart made another attempt to have his sentence reviewed, but once again, his appeal was denied. 10 years later, in 2016, Stewart became eligible for parole, but his request was denied. The reason was clear. Even after spending 2 decades in prison, he still refused to admit to the crime and maintained his innocence. The judge also voiced concerns that Stewart remained a danger to society. As of now, Stewart remains behind bars, with little chance of being released anytime soon. It's worth mentioning that Stewart was ultimately ruled out as a suspect in the other murders I mentioned earlier. Those crimes turned out to be the work of another truck driver who was arrested in late 1997. While prosecutors linked him to just 2 murders, they still believe he might be responsible for several other unsolved cases. As for Stewart, investigators also suspected that Celine might not have been his only victim. However, after all these years, no evidence has been found to connect him to any other crimes. Max received an urgent call from his close friend, Jonathan Hoffman, on May 18, 2012, at 5 p.m. Both were seniors at Farmington Central High School in the affluent West Bloomfield area near Detroit, Michigan. Their friendship began in 9th grade during an English class and was sparked by a mutual appreciation for Tupac, one of the most influential figures in American hip-hop. Jonathan confided in Max that he had recently failed a court-mandated drug screening. He had been on probation since authorities found a prohibited synthetic substance in his vehicle 2 months earlier. Jonathan expressed concern over his grandmother Sandra's intense anger towards him. At 17 years old, Jonathan had been living in his grandparents' apartment for 9 months following his parents' divorce and their relocation to Arizona. Initially, Jonathan went with his parents to Arizona. However, shortly after their arrival, the family was dealt a severe blow when his younger sister Jessica was diagnosed with a benign brain tumor. This necessitated multiple surgeries and ongoing medical care. Adapting to a new school while coping with his sister's health issues left Jonathan feeling unhappy and despondent. Jonathan was overjoyed when his grandmother Sandra suggested he return to West Bloomfield and stay with her until he completed high school. The prospect of reuniting with friends and familiar surroundings excited him. Nevertheless, not everyone approved of the arrangement between Jonathan and his grandmother. Jonathan's father, Michael, a prominent attorney for many years, had observed some disconcerting traits in Sandra's personality. 74-year-old Sandra Lane, a retired educator and mother of 5, could be exacting and stern. While she cherished her grandson deeply along with her 85-year-old husband Fred, the situation presented its challenges given the teenager's yearning to reconnect with friends during what should have been a stable final year at Farmington Central High School. Jonathan's father eventually conceded, allowing him to thrive once again at Farmington High School. There, he was recognized as the class clown, an exceptionally intelligent student, and a tech whiz. He had secured a full scholarship to Eastern Michigan University. His peers saw him as a spirited, cheerful, and optimistic individual. That's why Jonathan's call to Max caused such alarm. He didn't sound like himself. His voice carried not only concern, but also palpable fear. The friends decided to meet up later that same day, and Jonathan promised he'd text within the next 30 minutes to confirm the time. Max waited for the message, but 40 minutes passed with no word from his friend. Growing impatient, Max decided to call Jonathan directly. The phone rang and rang without any response. Unbeknownst to him at the time, Jonathan would never be able to reply again. Just before this incident, around 5:20 p.m., the West Bloomfield Township Police Department received an emergency call from Sandra Lane's residence, Jonathan's grandmother's home. The young caller informed the dispatcher he had been shot and struggled for breath over those 3 minutes. He begged for help, stating that he was on the brink of death. The assailant had already fled the scene without seeking aid. The subsequent events were even more horrific. The emergency dispatcher listened as Jonathan frantically called out for help before several gunshots rang out again. His screams of pain were followed by faint words that he was dying. Then came a short silence before a woman's scream echoed through the line, leading to an eerie quietude. By about 5:30 p.m., West Bloomfield police arrived at Sandra Lane's condo in the serene Maple Point gated community, a neighborhood known for its low crime rate and predominantly inhabited by retirees. A resident had reported hearing gunshots in this typically peaceful area. As officers disembarked from their vehicle onto the neatly kept lawn, they headed into what would become one of their most chilling calls yet. Another gunshot reverberated from within the residence. Before the officers could make their way inside, a woman appeared at the front door, ignoring the officers' instructions to disarm herself. She was a small, elderly woman with fading red hair, her clothes spattered with blood. With her hands raised in surrender, she informed the officers that she had just taken her grandson's life. This revelation stunned the officers, yet it paled in comparison to what awaited them inside. As they entered the condo, the officers were confronted with a ghastly scene. Blood and smudges were present in nearly every room. Bullet impacts marred both walls and furnishings, and empty shell casings littered the ground. Near the entryway lay a discarded 9mm Glock 17 semi-automatic handgun. Subsequent forensic analysis would uncover additional magazines for the firearm hidden within the residence. On the upper floor, police found 17-year-old Jonathan Hoffman sprawled face down in a pool of blood. He suffered from multiple gunshot wounds across his chest, arms, back, and stomach, indicating that many shots were fired at close quarters. Emergency medical personnel swiftly transported him to Botsford Hospital, clinging to hope they could save him. Sadly, by 6 p.m., Jonathan succumbed to his injuries. Sandra was taken to the closest medical facility as a precautionary measure. Medical professionals conducted various examinations to confirm her well-being. The next day, Sandra Lane faced charges for her grandson's homicide and was detained without bail while awaiting trial for either first or second-degree murder. Her guilt left to be determined by a jury. Throughout this ordeal, she maintained her innocence. News of this incident plunged Jonathan's family, friends, and neighbors into deep sorrow and shock. They all pondered what could have driven Sandra to turn a firearm on her dearly loved grandson. The news of this tragic event spread rapidly through the tranquil neighborhood, with media outlets speculating on various theories. Whispers suggested that Jonathan had failed a drug screening test. Journalists highlighted a narrative involving two neglectful parents who left their substance-dependent teenage son in the care of elderly grandparents. Based on the grandmother's testimony, it was revealed that at the time of Jonathan's passing, he had an illegal synthetic drug in his system which had previously caused him complications. His death occurred shortly after another sensational incident involving hallucinogen consumption. Just 2 weeks prior, another youth under the influence of drugs assaulted his family with a baseball bat, resulting in a fatal event. Takir Cipriana and his accomplice consumed a prohibited substance before attacking their parents. Sandra Lane's attorney argued that she had legitimate concerns for her safety due to managing a young man on probation who was difficult to restrain. It was widely reported that this particular drug could induce aggression in users. If an incident similar to Takir's had occurred at Sandra's residence, could her actions against Jonathan be justified as self-defense? This was the reasoning Sandra provided to both the police and jury. She asserted that since Jonathan's return to West Bloomfield, he had become unruly and exhibited aggressive behavior. Sandra claimed that he rarely left the house and mingled with teenagers addicted to dangerous synthetic drugs. Sandra also stated that Jonathan's parents did not inform her about his addiction before his arrival, and showed little concern for his activities during his stay. Michael, Jonathan's father, was portrayed as having abandoned him. Jonathan frequently had fits of rage, destroying objects and damaging furniture in his room. When upset or during disputes, he would lash out, even breaking his own possessions like his computer monitor and phone. Authorities confirmed that Jonathan had a history with illegal substances. On March 17, 2011, he was apprehended and penalized for possessing hallucinogenic drugs. Subsequently, in court, he received a 93-day deferred sentence, along with a year of probation and the requirement for random drug screenings related to these substances. Jonathan's acquaintances shared with law enforcement their concerns regarding his drug habit and their efforts to redirect him away from it. Sandra exerted considerable effort to assist Jonathan in reforming his ways, focusing on his academic performance and adhering to her guidelines. Nevertheless, he resisted these attempts, displaying defiance, erratic behavior, and occasional aggression. Fred confirmed that from the moment Jonathan arrived, there were continuous and intense disputes between him and Sandra. She even contacted the police multiple times due to Jonathan becoming utterly unmanageable. She sought assistance from the school as well, but all efforts proved futile. Sandra recounted an incident where Jonathan, under the influence of drugs, lost complete control. This situation necessitated hospital staff to restrain him to a gurney. The elderly woman implored his parents for help. However, his father remained indifferent and did not return to Michigan. Gradually, Sandra began fearing for her safety. She confided in her husband about her concerns regarding their grandson and his disreputable associates. In a bid for self-protection and to safeguard her elderly husband, feeling cornered with no other option, Sandra acquired a Glock 17 pistol for defense in case Jonathan or his friends became aggressive. On the critical morning of May 18, 2012, Lane took Jonathan for a drug test that returned positive for illicit substances. Jonathan was instructed to undergo another test later that day. Upon receiving another positive result, he became furious while in his grandmother's vehicle. He resorted to swearing violently, kicking the dashboard and at one point seizing the steering wheel, compelling Sandra to halt the car multiple times. Jonathan even attempted to snatch the car keys at one juncture. Upon their return home, the confrontation intensified. Apprehensive that he might be incarcerated, Jonathan decided to flee immediately to Arizona. He demanded $2,000 and the car keys from his grandmother. She complied with neither request. When Grandpa Fred took the dog for a walk, Sandra felt overwhelmingly frightened and attempted to pacify the teenager, to no avail. She retreated to her bedroom and retrieved the loaded pistol, hoping it would compel her grandson to heed her words, or at least acknowledge her presence. Upon returning upstairs to Jonathan's bedroom and finding him in the bathroom, instead of heeding her, the boy hurled insults, kicked her in the abdomen, and struck her on the head. A struggle ensued during which Sandra discharged the firearm. She then fled to the basement in a state of panic, seeking refuge. After a while, she ventured upstairs to check on him, only for her grandson to assault her once more, attempting to wrest the gun away. In the ensuing altercation, she shot again in self-defense. This narrative paints a picture of elderly individuals trapped in a dire predicament that tragically culminated in Sandra shooting her beloved grandson out of genuine fear for her own life. However, questions remain as to whether Lane's account is entirely accurate. As the investigation deepened, a contrasting narrative began to surface, one that was still tragic but considerably more concerning. Initial claims by Sandra regarding Jonathan's alleged violent nature didn't align with the experiences of those who knew him personally. Contrary to portraying him as aggressive, interviews revealed that at school, Jonathan was known as humorous and peace-loving. He was always quick to diffuse conflicts with his humor and intelligence. Friends also testified that they hadn't observed any recent changes in his demeanor. Furthermore, Jonathan was described as having a very lean build, standing at just 1.67 meters tall and weighing merely 50 kilograms, hardly fitting the profile of a physically intimidating person. His stature was notably similar to his grandmother's. It appeared that instances of Jonathan's so-called rage were exclusively reported by Sandra, a claim now met with skepticism. Fred, Sandra's husband, acknowledged witnessing heated arguments between his wife and grandson. Despite being present at home almost all the time, he never witnessed any physical violence. Sandra played a key role in overseeing Jonathan's education, establishing strict expectations, which the teenager had difficulty meeting. Fred even suggested sending Jonathan back to his parents in Arizona. However, Sandra rejected this proposal, contradicting her claim that the boy was unmanageable under her care. Jennifer, Sandra's daughter, told the police that during the 9 months Jonathan stayed with his grandparents, he maintained daily communication with her and visited them monthly. Throughout this period, Sandra never reported any issues between her and Jonathan, nor did she express feeling overwhelmed by his presence. When Jennifer learned about Jonathan's legal troubles involving illicit substances, she discussed possible solutions with her mother. She considered either rehabilitation or sending him back to Arizona. Sandra convinced her that she could handle the situation independently. Reluctantly, Jennifer agreed to leave her son in her parents' custody, a decision that would later prove tragically significant. Authorities were summoned to the Lane household on 2 occasions. The first call came in March 2012 when Jonathan himself dialed emergency services. He was distressed after consuming magic mushrooms and experiencing severe paranoia, fearing for his life. Upon arrival, police noted that he showed no aggression but was terrified upon seeing them. He eagerly embraced one officer before being secured to a stretcher for his protection and transported to a medical facility. Just 4 days after this incident with magic mushrooms, Sandra Lane reached out to 911 again. She reported that her grandson was enraged and attempting to flee, while Jonathan informed the dispatcher that his grandmother was forcibly trying to confine him in her vehicle. When officers arrived, they encountered Jonathan vocally berating his grandmother. The law enforcement officials then proposed intervening with the irate youth. Sandra opted to handle the matter herself. This episode was recorded in the police files as a routine verbal dispute between a guardian and a child, which was settled amicably. However, for the detectives leading the investigation, this case increasingly seemed less about a rebellious teenager spiraling out of control and more about a woman enforcing her authority over a defiant child. The hearing on April 12th regarding the possession of prohibited substances and subsequent probation had evidently enraged Sandra. She believed she could discipline her grandson effectively. Up until that point, Sandra had been resolute in steering Jonathan onto the correct path. Yet, as graduation neared and her opportunities dwindled, this mission began to look like a failure. In that moment, Sandra faced many choices. She could have contacted her daughter or sent Jonathan for rehabilitation. Instead, she acquired a semi-automatic pistol and took several shooting lessons at a firing range. Determined to prevail in this conflict and assert control over her unruly teenage grandson at any cost, for days after Jonathan was placed on probation, Sandra Lane applied for a license to carry a firearm. On April 18th, she purchased a 9mm Glock, explaining to the store owner that she needed it for home protection. She chose a weapon intended for lethal force, along with ammunition containing expanding bullets designed to inflict maximum damage. After buying the pistol, Sandra trained at the nearest shooting range until she felt proficient in handling it. She kept her newfound expertise hidden from her husband, who remained unaware of the gun's presence in their home. He was quite taken aback when he discovered how much his wife had managed to achieve covertly. On the fateful day of May 18, 2012, Sandra and Jonathan returned home at around 5 p.m. Sandra then requested her husband, Fred, to take their dog for a walk and insisted that he remain outside until she gave him permission to return. Their outdoor time extended for so long that both the homeowner and the dog grew weary. They ended up sitting together on the grass watching a basketball game. As Fred Lane, the grandfather of the deceased high schooler, recounted during an interview, when they heard police sirens, he failed to grasp the situation. Why did Sandra want Fred to leave them? It seemed less like the action of a woman fearing for her life, and more like someone with a plan, intent on carrying it out without interference or witnesses. If Jonathan was as agitated as described by his grandmother, it's unlikely Fred would have left them alone. However, more compelling evidence against Sandra was yet to come. At that same time, 5 p.m., Jonathan was talking with his friend Max about their evening plans. Max informed the police that Jonathan's tone wasn't angry or excited. Instead, he sounded frightened. He was worried about failing a drug test and anxious about his grandmother's reaction. Jonathan mentioned that Sandra was so furious she threatened to send him back to Arizona. Sandra claimed her grandson violently assaulted her, striking her in the head and abdomen before she discharged the firearm. Medical personnel from the nearest hospital examined her immediately after the incident, but found no injuries or bruises. Ballistic evidence revealed Sandra fired the weapon more than 10 times throughout various locations in the house. 6 bullets struck Jonathan. 2 shots were aimed at his back, indicating he attempted to flee from Sandra. Another shot struck him in the abdomen while he was wounded and conversing with a 911 dispatcher. The police were convinced it was Sandra chasing Jonathan, not the other way around. The grandmother sought to punish her grandson for his perceived wrongdoing while he sought refuge. At some point, she descended to the basement to reload her pistol, likely when Jonathan ascended to his bedroom to call 911, and subsequently returned, shooting him at close range while he lay on the floor bleeding. The final conclusive blow against Sandra's claims of self-defense came from the toxicology report. According to the report, at the time of the shooting, Jonathan's bloodstream didn't contain any prohibited substances. Only a metabolite of a harmful drug was identified in his urine. The forensic examiner clarified that the residual traces discovered in the urine indicated that all substances had left his body and had no impact on Hoffman's behavior. In other words, Jonathan was entirely lucid when Sandra opened fire on him. Consequently, the jury dismissed the defendant's self-defense claim. On March 19, 2013, Sandra Lane was convicted of a serious crime against her grandson, Jonathan Hoffman. Prior to sentencing, the elderly woman expressed regret for her actions, pleading for understanding. She claimed that her intention had not been to take the teenager's life, but rather to help him resolve his issues together. Meanwhile, her daughter Jennifer urged for the harshest punishment for her mother. She asserted that Sandra Lane was utterly malevolent and would undoubtedly repeat her actions if given the opportunity. Jennifer depicted her mother as a monstrous and obsessed individual fixated on academic achievement. She firmly believed that everything Lane had stated in her statement was falsehoods. She concluded by stating that her son now resided in heaven, a place where Sandra would never have access. Lane received a minimum sentence of 20 years in addition to a mandatory 2-year term for utilizing a weapon in the commission of manslaughter. Her lawyer had pleaded on her behalf, citing concerns about her potential survival during an extended prison confinement. Jonathan's funeral occurred on May 22, 2012, with approximately 700 people who had known and cherished the young man in attendance. They fondly recalled moments spent with him and cherished him as a cheerful individual who never failed to bring laughter to those around him. As a grandson, Jonathan fell short of his grandmother's expectations, ultimately leading her to conclude that he did not belong in this world. 25-year-old Kathy Warnett Hicks lived in Atlanta in 1982. She was an employee for Delta Airlines. In September, Kathy was visiting Hawaii to participate in a company softball tournament. She was staying at the Iwikai Hotel. Kathy was last seen by her co-workers on September 19th at 1:30 a.m. She was seen with a man named Tommy. According to the co-workers, Kathy and Tommy rode an elevator from the 24th floor to the hotel lobby. The pair then went toward the pool area while her friends went to a nearby club. A little later in the day, at 10 a.m., 2 joggers found a woman's body when they stopped by the water reserve not far from the hotel. She was quickly identified as Kathy Hicks. She had been strangled. Investigators from the Honolulu Police Department started investigating the case. DNA was found on Kathy's underwear that belonged to a male. The DNA was stored so it could be used later when DNA was more advanced. A sketch was made of the man witnesses saw Kathy with last. A co-worker of Kathy also told investigators that the man said he was a Navy sailor and had been in Hawaii for about 2 years, and that he was a native of Tuskegee, Alabama, and lived in Jacksonville, Florida before moving to Hawaii. No witnesses to the crime came forward and police did not find any other useful leads, so the case went cold. Then, in 2019, the solving of an entirely different cold case would lead to the suspect in Kathy's case. Investigators tested DNA found at the crime scene of Pamela Cahanes and found that 61-year-old Thomas Lewis Garner is responsible for taking her life. Thereafter, in 2021, they found that his DNA also matched the DNA found on Kathy Hicks' underwear. Thomas worked as a dental hygienist in Jacksonville, Florida. He was also a veteran. In June of 2021, he was given a life sentence for what he did to Pamela, and investigators are sure he'll soon be convicted for taking Kathy's life. Attorney Megan Cowell said that it is vital that he should be prosecuted even though he was already sentenced to life in prison. It's justice for the victim and the victim's family. Bringing a prosecution on behalf of the victim's family often makes you feel like justice has prevailed. Let's say, for example, the Florida Supreme Court overrules the conviction for some reason and dismisses the case. Now, if the government doesn't bring the case against the same suspect, the suspect will be let out into the community and could and probably would reoffend. DNA is extremely helpful because we can rely on the science. So now we can identify the perpetrator, we can prosecute the perpetrator, and hopefully convict the perpetrator. I'm sure many of you also now want to hear more about the Pamela Caines case. So here it is in a nutshell. Pamela grew up in Stillwater, Minnesota. In 1984, 25-year-old Pamela enlisted in the Navy. In May of that year, she left behind her family and flew across the country to Orlando, Florida, to begin training at the Orlando Naval Training Center. Sadly, Pamela never had the chance to see her dreams come true. 2 days after her graduation in August 1984, her lifeless body was discovered in front of a vacant home in Sanford, Florida. She had been assaulted and strangled. Investigators were able to collect DNA belonging to an unknown man from her body. In 2000 and 2005, investigators unsuccessfully attempted to find a DNA match to Pamela's attacker. In 2015, investigators finally got a break. DNA from Pamela's clothing was submitted to a private forensic genealogy service. Investigators were able to access DNA profiles of individuals who submitted their DNA to genealogy websites. They found a match to a distant relative of Pamela's attacker. Investigators began to build a family tree that would eventually lead them to Thomas Garner, as we already know. Investigators had to make sure they had the right guy, so they then collected a cigarette that he had smoked. The samples matched the DNA found on skin collected from underneath Pamela's fingernails. Her surviving family members were very happy to hear the great news when investigators told them that he was arrested and also when he was convicted. Sonia Carmen Herrickstone was a 30-year-old single mother living with her 4-year-old daughter in Monterey County, California in 1981. She was a merchandiser and sales representative for Levi Strauss & Company. On October 15, 1981, a friend of Sonia, Colleen McBride, knocked on her front door. When Sonia didn't answer, McBride made her way inside. It was then that she found Sonia's partially clothed body sprawled on the floor of her living room. She had been strangled with a pair of pantyhose. Several pieces of DNA evidence were collected from the crime scene to be used later. Investigators decided to make a timeline of the crime. They believe her life was taken while her young daughter was at school. It was around noon when her body was found. Soon after the crime took place, a man told investigators that he has a friend who admitted to being inside Sonia's house the morning her life was taken. The friend is Michael Glazebrook, Sonia's neighbor. A day after the crime occurred, investigators decided to interview Michael. They saw that he had a scratch on his face and was extremely nervous. On December 18, 1981, he was arrested in connection to the case. In 1983, he was tried, but the jury could not agree on his innocence or guilt. Prosecutors dropped the case following a mistrial. In the early 1980s, DNA evidence was a long way off. Blood was found under Sonia's fingernail, but lab technicians could only tell that it did not belong to her. In 2020, investigators decided to re-examine the case. They tested the DNA evidence they had collected back in 1981 again. They were then able to create a DNA profile. Because they still believed Michael Glazebrook was involved, they collected his DNA sample. After some more testing, it was confirmed that Michael is responsible for taking the life of Sonia. 65-year-old Michael was arrested at his home in Seaside, California in August of 2021. He worked as a school bus driver, which is just terrifying. Michael now finds himself in the Monterey County Jail where he is being held in lieu of bail, set at $1 million. Faith Hedgenpeth was born on September 26, 1992 in Warren County, North Carolina. She is a member of the Holly Wasapone Native American tribe. In high school, Faith was an honor student, a cheerleader, and a member of many extracurricular clubs and organizations. She did so well that she earned the Gates Millennium Scholarship to attend University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. By 2012, she was an undergraduate student in her third year at the university. Faith lived in an off-campus apartment with her friend Karina Rosario and Karina's boyfriend, Eric Tacoy Jones. The relationship between Karina and Eric soured and he had to move out. He abused Karina, and when he tried to break into the apartment, Faith and Karina went to court to get a protective order that required Eric to stay away from them. Eric really hated Faith because he believed she is the reason that his relationship with Karina did not work out. At one point, he called Faith and threatened to take her life. Just after midnight on September 7, 2012, and Karina left their apartment to go to a nightclub in downtown Chapel Hill called The Thrill. Just after 2 a.m., the pair left the club and headed home. This is the last time Faith would be seen alive. By 3 a.m., Faith and Karina had returned to their apartment. A woman living below them was awake and watching TV and said she heard thumping noises. She described it as being similar to a heavy bag being dropped or furniture being overturned. Around this time, Faith's Facebook account was accessed. At 3:40 a.m., a text was sent from Faith's phone to that of Brandon Edwards, a former boyfriend of hers. She asked him to come over, but he did not respond. Karina's phone records showed that she was also trying to call Brandon around the same time. When Brandon did not answer, Karina called a fellow University of North Carolina Chapel Hill student, Jordan McCrae. At 4:25 a.m., she left the apartment to get in Jordan's car. She left the apartment door unlocked. 6 hours later, at 10:30 a.m., Karina tried to call Faith, but she did not get an answer. Karina then called another friend, Marisol Rengel, who gave her a ride back to Faith and Karina's apartment. At the apartment in Faith's bedroom, Karina and Marisol made a startling discovery. They found Faith's body wrapped in a quilt. She had been beaten. They then called 911 to inform the police. An autopsy revealed that Faith suffered blunt force trauma to the head. She was just 19 years old. At the crime scene, investigators were able to collect male DNA and use it to develop a DNA profile. Karina's ex-boyfriend and Faith's ex-roommate, Eric Jones, soon became a very strong suspect. Investigators learned of his history of domestic violence and his threats against Faith. It was also revealed that just before the crime, he sent a text to an acquaintance asking for forgiveness for what I am about to do. After the crime, he changed the banner on his Facebook page to read, "Dear Lord, forgive me for all my sins and the sins I may commit today. Protect me from the girls who don't deserve me." Investigators requested a DNA sample from Merrick. After some resistance, he complied. Shockingly, his DNA did not match the sample from the apartment, and he was ruled out a suspect. Among the evidence at the crime scene was a note written in ballpoint pen on a white paper bag. It is believed that the person who took Faith's life wrote the note. A friend of Faith shared with police a long conversation when Faith Pocket dialed a friend on the night she lost her life. In 2016, Parabon Nanolabs created an image of what the suspect looked like using his DNA. Based on his DNA, Parabon was also able to say that most of his genetic markers indicated that he has Mexican, Colombian, and Iberian ancestry. On September 16, 2021, the Chapel Hill Police Department arrested 28-year-old Miguel Seguero Oliviers in connection to the case. He lives in Durham, North Carolina, close to where Faith lived. In August of 2021, Miguel had been arrested for drunk driving in Wake County. His DNA was taken, and it was then that the investigators noticed that his DNA matched the male DNA sample found at the crime scene back in 2012. During the police press conference, Faith's mother, Connie Hedgenbeth, said she cried tears of joy after learning about the arrest. "When I got the news this morning, I didn't do anything but cry and thank God and praise God because I put it in his hands and it was his timing. I don't know why it took so long, but I just know that it was him." Miguel is currently being held without bond at Durham County Detention Center. Investigators have not released a lot of information about him yet. We do not know if he and Faith knew each other. Faith was just 19 years old. She would have been the first one in her family to graduate from college. She had aspirations to be a teacher or a pediatrician so that she could help others. But sadly, she never got to achieve those dreams. 36-year-old Michael Glover lived in Macon in 2004. He was a pastor and was well known in the community. On March 29th, he was fatally shot in the carport of his West Macon home. People in the community were shocked as he was so beloved. Investigators collected DNA from the suspect at the crime and stored it to be used later. For Michael's family, it was a long wait. His father, Willie Glover, described Michael as special and unique, and would give the shirt off his back to help anyone. "We were a close-knit family. We got together and he was missing." Finally, in 2021, his family would receive some good news. In March of 2021, 39-year-old Terrence Dean of Macon was arrested. It was discovered that his DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene back in 2004, as well as DNA found on an assault case. Investigator Malcolm Bryant with the Bibb County Sheriff's Office had this to say: "The investigators that started the case, they did a good job in regards to including the small details, which was very important. Taking that into consideration, I felt that there was a great chance that this case would lead to an arrest. Technology is nowhere near where it was back in 2004, which is a great thing for us. I think that is the direction that law enforcement is taking in general towards the technology area. He believes they will be able to solve many more cases in the near future." Terrence Dean is currently being held without bond at this time. The motive has not been made public. The Inman family projected an image of perfect harmony to those on the outside. They were regular churchgoers every Sunday to all Woodport sing. Yet within their tight-knit circle, one could fathom what really happened behind closed doors. Back in 3, William and Sandra Inman's paths crossed at church. He was 18, she just 16. Their union received their parents' blessing, leading to marriage. The couple made their home in the modest community of Logan, located in Hawking County, Ohio. Bill Inman possessed strong religious convictions and balanced his job in construction with playing musical instruments for the Sky of Faith Evangelical Church in Nelsonville, Ohio. Sandra took on the role of managing the household. In 1984, they were delighted to welcome their son, William Jr., to distinguish between father and son. The head of the family was called Bill, while the younger one was known as Will. As time passed, William Jr. grew up. At age 17 in 2001, he met a 15-year-old named Summer Cook at church, quite reminiscent of his parents' encounter. Will and Summer maintained a friendship for 3 years before getting married when Summer turned 18 in 2004. The newlyweds began their life together by residing with Will's parents in a spacious house in Logan, Ohio. In that same year, when Bill reached the age of 39, he envisioned himself as a spiritual guide. Transforming his garage into a makeshift sanctuary, he began hosting gatherings there. Despite local skepticism towards this self-declared minister's actions, his enigmatic garage started to attract neighbors first, then their friends, and more individuals seeking solace through prayer and leaving offerings. By 2005, Will and Summer were overjoyed with the birth of their son Alex. Around this time, financial strains began affecting the Inman household since Bill's religious endeavors were not financially rewarding. This situation led the family to consider relocating to another state in pursuit of better employment opportunities. By 2006, the Inman family had fully resettled in Florida. Both Bill and Will promptly secured employment in hotel construction. Meanwhile, Sandra and Summer dedicated themselves to homemaking and nurturing young Alex. 2 years later, the Inmans made their way back to Ohio from Florida. By then, they had forfeited their Logan home due to an inability to reclaim it and settled in a rental in Vinton's countryside. Starting a new chapter shortly after their relocation, in 2008, and Summer welcomed their second child, a daughter named Kelly. By 2010, their family grew with the arrival of another daughter, Alana. As young parents, Will and Summer often sought weekends away for relaxation and rejuvenation. During these times, Bill and Sandra, always supportive, took on the role of caring for their grandchildren. The weekends were filled with joy as they cherished moments with their 3 grandchildren. In the spring of 2010, Bill Inman secured a pastor's license and proclaimed himself the head of the Skinnier Faith Church. Alongside his wife, he established a charitable entity named Ranch of Mercy to assist the jobless and homeless. His vision was grand. He wanted to construct a large dwelling for orphans and widows. However, financial resources were quite lacking. To address this issue, Bill conceived a lottery scheme. Each participant would purchase a ticket with proceeds earmarked for building the shelter. The grand prize was either a house or $200,000 plus 99 other significant rewards. The community became aware of this lottery through news and advertisements. Bill initially promoted it door to door, assuring participants of lavish rewards while emphasizing that surplus funds were destined for providing a haven for the destitute. Priced at $10 per ticket, Bill managed to sell 100,000 tickets, amassing $1 million for the project. The drawing was set for September 2010. In June 2010, personal upheaval struck the Inman family when Summer expressed her desire to divorce Will after 6 years of marriage. This declaration came not long after she had penned a significant entry in her personal diary. "I am utterly exhausted from constantly trying to please everyone around me. Do not deserve happiness. Do I not have the right to love someone and feel that love in return? I'm uncertain if now is the appropriate time, but I feel compelled to share everything with Will. Troubles me deeply, yet he deserves to know the truth. He should be aware that I no longer wish to be with him. I need to be alone to rediscover myself and understand my current identity. At this moment, I feel like a servant, perpetually running around and obeying others. I adore my children with all my heart and would never trade them for anything. However, I don't want them to grow up witnessing their mother merely following orders all the time. I'm unsure how Will might react to this revelation. There's a chance he could become angry, attempt to take the children away, or worse, resort to threats or harm. It's important for our children to see us as equals. I'm aware that Will's parents might turn against me and try to convince me to stay, but such actions won't change anything. Last night, when Will asked me what I wanted, my mind was blank. All I could think of was what I don't want. I don't want to feel unhappy and trapped any longer, but I couldn't bring myself to voice these thoughts. So instead, I sat there in silence. Every day feels like a battle. All I yearn for is rest, to cry and sleep without interruption. But finding a way out of this situation seems impossible at times. My hope is that by the time of my next journal entry, I'll have clarity on how to resolve everything. As the summer progressed, we moved forward with the divorce proceedings. Departing from the Inman residence, I took our son and both daughters along with my personal belongings. We sought refuge at my parents' home. Wanting not to disrupt the children's relationship with their father or grandparents, visits were scheduled regularly for them. 2 months following our separation in August 2010, I began a relationship with Adam Peters while also securing employment at a bank in Logan's downtown area, working in a cleaning capacity due to limited educational background. When September arrived, it marked another significant event, the Ranch of Mercy's house raffle, spearheaded by the Inman family. Although construction on the prize house was supposed to begin, both September and October passed without any progress. No raffle took place, and no explanations were given. The organization didn't seem to rush to refund participants either. By December 1st, 2010, the Inmans got a notice requiring them to leave their rented residence due to significant unpaid rent. In response, Summer and Adam went to collect her remaining belongings from the Inman home. However, they were denied entry. This led Summer to call the police, reporting that her estranged husband was intimidating her and preventing her from retrieving her possessions. When the police arrived, and his parents continued to block access, Will even escalated matters by threatening Adam and clashing with an officer. Consequently, Summer filed a legal complaint against Will. She reflected on their relationship, recalling how idyllic it seemed before marriage, but lamenting its drastic change afterward. Will's behavior reportedly became very controlling, affecting everything from her diet to household responsibilities and even intimate aspects of their life. She wasn't allowed to sleep without his approval and was confined at home without access to her phone or keys. Summer revealed Will's aspirations for a large family, his interest in polygamy, and his activities on related websites, including posting inappropriate images. She also disclosed threats he made if she pursued divorce, and mentioned how her cats mysteriously disappeared, attributed their disappearance nonchalantly to them escaping through an open window. Following Summer's allegations, Will provided his version of events. He justified taking Summer's phone and keys by suggesting he suspected her of infidelity. Regarding the cats, he said that due to their wild behavior and damage caused to furniture and family members, he relocated them to a shelter. As a result of these conflicts and accusations, Will was subjected to a restraining order, preventing him from approaching Summer, and faced penalties and probation amidst further investigations. A fierce battle for custody emerged between the families. The Inmans filed police report against Adam Peters, labeling him a potential threat to the safety of Alex Kelly and Alana. Tragically, Summer's life took a dark turn. On the night March 22, 2011, Summerman, just 25 years old, was finishing her shift at the bank. She wrapped up her cleaning duties after the office had closed. Around 11 p.m., she stepped outside to dispose of the trash. Summer had texted her partner Adam to meet her after work, but he didn't find her by 11:30 p.m. Worried, Adam arrived at the bank and began his search. He discovered her personal items scattered near a dumpster in an alley, her phone, keys, and a music player still playing with headphones nearby in the grass. Her jacket lay there too. Alarmed, Adam immediately contacted Summer's parents to inform them of her disappearance and stressed the need to alert the police swiftly. Initially, Summer's parents called the bank, guessing she might have stayed longer for extra work and misplaced her belongings. Security personnel had no clues about her whereabouts. They then contacted Logan police to report Summer missing, emphasizing her punctuality and that she rarely stayed late at work. Police arrived at the scene where they found Summer's belongings. They heard accounts from 3 eyewitnesses who saw her abduction about an hour earlier. 2 women out for an evening jog reported seeing Summer as she threw out the trash. At that moment, a white Ford Crown Victoria, driven by a blonde woman, 2 individuals dressed in black balaclavas exited the vehicle and forcefully grabbed Summer, shoving her into the back seat despite her resistance and cries for help. One bystander's attempt to intervene was thwarted when the female driver incapacitated him with pepper spray, forcing him to retreat. The car quickly left the area. The 2 jogging witnesses immediately headed to the nearest police station to report what they had witnessed. Their account initially faced skepticism from the police, who found their narrative peculiar and doubted its authenticity, expecting it might be a fabricated story. The police reached the abduction site of Summer Inman just an hour after her parents filed the missing person report. However, initial efforts did not lead to locating the missing 25-year-old. News of Summerman's kidnapping quickly circulated through all local media outlets, capturing the community's attention. Hundreds of Logan's residents united in a concerted effort to locate her. As 3 days elapsed, the possibility of finding Summer safe and sound grew increasingly faint. Throughout this harrowing time, her parents endeavored to maintain hope against despairing thoughts. Shortly before her disappearance, Summer Inman shared a photo on Facebook featuring herself, her new partner Adam, and her children. The image portrayed them as a content family unit. Will Inman, who had access to Adam Peters' Facebook page, surprisingly still on his friends' list despite being Summer's current partner, noticed this update. It raises an intriguing question. Why would a husband befriend his wife's new companion? The backstory revealed that Adam, a man without stable employment, had been hired by the Inmans a year earlier, in spring 2010, for various household tasks. It was then that Adam and Summer crossed paths and developed a bond. Despite initial reluctance, Summer eventually reciprocated Adam's affections. Her diary entry reflects this internal conflict. My mind screamed, "Run, get out of here now." But instead I stayed and let him embrace me and then delve deeper. I am very sorry about this. I am guilty. This encounter signified the unraveling of Summer's life within the Inman family. Yearning for happiness and love, She initiated divorce proceedings which were prolonged 5 days before vanishing. Will tested the proposed spousal support per child monthly, suggesting a reduction to $50, given his annual earnings of just $6,000. Will and his parents sought full custody of the children, but their petition was rejected by the court. After losing contact with their grandchildren, Bill and Sandra visibly deteriorated. They lost weight and were clearly affected, as those who knew them concurred that the grandchildren were the light of their lives. In March 2011, amidst the investigation into Summer's disappearance, the Inman family was located. They were found at the residence of Bill's 70-year-old mother in Jackson, Ohio. Bill, Sandra, and Will collectively asserted their ignorance regarding Summer's abduction. The Inmans recounted that on the night of Summer's kidnapping, they were en route to Cleveland to view a new property. However, they encountered car trouble after 3 hours on the road, leading to an overnight ordeal of vehicular repairs on the roadside before returning to Logan the next morning. They maintained that their interactions with Summer were generally amicable within frequent disputes. Yet they attributed a shift in their familial harmony to Adam Peters' employment in their household, describing this phase as challenging. The trio consistently portrayed Adam as a negative influence, alleging he was the catalyst for the disintegration of their previously harmonious and tightly knit family. The investigation took a crucial turn when police noticed a white Ford Crown Victoria at the Inman family's residence. Upon inspection of the vehicle, a GPS receiver was confiscated. Subsequent examination revealed that on March 22nd, the day Summer was abducted, this car was in Logan. The GPS was deactivated at 5:30 p.m. that evening and reactivated the next morning again in Logan, contradicting the Inman's claim of traveling to Cleveland. Phone records further corroborated that all 3 family members were in Logan on both March 22nd and 23rd. Additional inquiries revealed that on the morning of March 23rd, around 7:30 a.m., the Inmans were at a car wash engaging in a thorough interior cleaning of the vehicle. Bill, Sandra, and Will were all present, but Summer was notably absent following this event. They visited an auto shop in Cleveland for a tire change. While there, a shop employee noticed something odd. Bill was choosing to replace nearly new tires with used ones, simply because he didn't like his current set change. There was also evidence that the Inmans attempted to modify the car's appearance. Notably, Bill had removed a police spotlight that had previously been mounted on the driver's side door next to the mirror. Bill, Sandra, and Will Inman were apprehended and brought in for interrogation. Prior to their arrest, Bill assured his elderly mother of their innocence, attributing the situation to a test from the devil. Throughout the questioning, they consistently claimed they were unaware of Summer Inman's abduction and didn't know who the kidnapper was. However, after several hours and faced with the possibility of capital punishment if convicted, Sandra Inman's resolve faltered. Eventually, she disclosed the truth. Sandra confessed that they were responsible for Summer's abduction on the night of March 22nd. She detailed how Bill and Will had disguised themselves in black masks. Sandra admitted that her initial plan was merely to abduct and intimidate Summer. However, events took an unexpected and tragic turn. According to Sandra's confession, when Summer was forcibly placed in the car's back seat, Will restrained her with plastic ties around her neck, hands, and feet, intending merely to frighten her into granting him access to their children. As the situation escalated, Will realized that Summer was on the brink of unconsciousness. He panicked and desperately searched for a knife to release her, shouting frantically to his mother, "Oh my God, Mom, where's the knife? I can't find it." Amidst their collective fear and desperate search for the knife, the situation worsened. Summer ceased breathing and tragically passed away. Sandra maintained that their objective was never to take Summer's life. They merely sought a resolution to their custody dispute and hoped to ensure regular visits with their grandchildren. On March 29, 2011, a week after the kidnapping, Sandra Inman disclosed the location of the body. Summer's remains were found in a septic tank on the grounds of Skinnier Faith Church near Nelsonville, about 30 kilometers from her workplace. Bill Inman had been involved in the church's construction. This place held personal significance for him and Sandra, as it was where they had married 28 years earlier. The Inmans were regulars at this church. Bill participated in its musical ensemble. Police uncovered the well by removing a concrete slab and unscrewing 6 bolts from the metal lid. When they opened it, they immediately saw Summer's legs. She had been thrown headfirst into the septic tank, still wearing her work attire. Her black t-shirt bore an ironic inscription, "I don't have anger issues, I have issues with idiots." A forensic examination confirmed that Summer had succumbed to strangulation. Apart from marks on her neck, hands, and legs indicating she'd been restrained, no other injuries were found on her body. This highlighted strangulation as the cause of her tragic demise. Sandra revealed that she originally planned to dispose of the body in a river, but reconsidered and decided it would be safer to conceal it in the well near the church. She believed this location would ensure it remained undiscovered for a long time. Sandra admitted to feeling deep shame for her actions and their irreversible consequences. During the subsequent trial, 49-year-old Bill Inman and 28-year-old Will Inman did not take any responsibility for Summer's death. Throughout the proceedings, they stayed mostly silent, showing no visible emotions and avoiding eye contact with Summer's grieving parents. Sandra Inman, at 47 years old, stood out as the only family member who accepted responsibility for her part in the tragic events. She maintained that the plan to intimidate Summer was entirely her own idea. In a deeply emotional moment before sentencing, Sandra, overcome with tears, faced Summer's parents and begged for their forgiveness. Her speech, though broken by sobs and a quivering voice, clearly expressed remorse. Sandra admitted she saw Summer as a daughter and regretted her catastrophic decision. In 2012, the verdict was handed down. All 3 members of the Inman family were convicted. Bill and Will Inman received life sentences without the possibility of parole. Sandra Inman also got a life sentence but with eligibility for parole after serving 15 years. However, among friends and church members familiar with the family's dynamics, doubts arose about Sandra being the mastermind behind the crime. It was commonly known that Bill had a dominant role in the family and usually made final decisions on all matters. Will, on his part, was seen as a pampered child whose desires were always met by his parents. Those close to the family speculated that Sandra's confession might have been a strategic move to reduce legal consequences for her husband and son. Currently, Alex and Alana are being raised by Summer's family. For quite some time, it was hard to explain to these grandchildren where their mother, father, grandmother, and grandfather had gone. 16-year-old Kim Bryant lived in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1979. Attended Western High School. January 26, 1979 started out normal for Kim as she went to school. Thereafter, she went to a Dairy Queen restaurant near North Decatur Boulevard and U.S. Highway 95. Later in the day, when she did not arrive back home, her family got worried and called the police. An extensive search for Kim was then launched. Almost a month later, on February 20th, 1979, Kim's body was found in the desert. She had been indecently assaulted. Investigators collected DNA evidence belonging to the suspect from her body, but were unable to make an identification. Over the years, a number of detectives worked the case, but weren't able to solve it until recently. A private donation was given to the investigators that allowed them to send the DNA sample of the suspect to Ortham Incorporated and pay for DNA testing. Ortham is a Texas-based laboratory. They conducted genealogical research on the sample. Their testing led to a relative of the suspect who agreed to give a second sample. In late November of 2021, investigators announced that they had identified Johnny Blake Peterson as the person responsible for taking Kim's life. At the time of the crime, Johnny was 19 years old. He previously attended the same high school as Kim. Johnny passed away in 1993. He was never considered a suspect until it was discovered that his DNA matched the DNA found at the crime scene back in 1979. Lieutenant Ray Spencer said during the press conference, 10 days ago, we were notified that the genealogical profile built by Ortham Labs based on the DNA recovered from the body of Kim Bryant at autopsy revealed that Johnny Blake Peterson is responsible. Ray Spencer also read a statement from Kim's father, Edward Elliott, in which he thanked the investigators for never giving up on the case. Kim was a beautiful girl with a bright future, and it makes me happy that something is being done to help solve cases such as hers. Kimberly Murga, the director of laboratory services for the Las Vegas police, said this: "We first attempted DNA on this particular case back in 2008. We were not able to get a DNA profile. Technology has continued to advance and revolutionize. We again attempted DNA on different items of evidence in January of this year. We were able to obtain a foreign male DNA profile on some evidence, and we put the DNA profile on the CODIS, the Combined DNA Index System, and at that time we obtained no hits. That's when the department turned to advanced genetic genealogy testing. It is not known if Kim and Johnny knew each other." 19-year-old Pamela Dorrington lived in Helena in 1968. She graduated from Helena High School and was working as a surgical tech at St. Peter's Hospital. Pamela was described as quiet but popular with plenty of friends. She loved animals, including her dog and horse, and was interested in languages with a hope of studying to become an interpreter. Pamela was last seen on the evening of February 16, 1968 at a restaurant in Helena. The next day, she was reported missing when her friends and family could not reach her. For months, law enforcement officers, family and friends looked for her, with flyers of her put up across the northwest region of the country. About 4 months after Pamela was last seen on June 13, 1968, the custodian of the gates of the Mountains Marina found human remains floating near the dock. After some testing, it was confirmed that the remains belonged to Pamela Dorrington. The man that lived in the apartment below Pamela was questioned by investigators, as he was acting strange, but there was not enough evidence against him, so the case went cold. In December of 2021, 79-year-old Courtney Brooke Atlas confessed to taking Pamela's life. He was the man that lived in the apartment below Pamela. According to him, on the morning of February 17, 1968, he called Pamela and said that there was a water leak in her apartment that needed to be fixed. He then entered her apartment and strangled her. Courtney then stored her body in a barrel at a hangar where he taught flying lessons. Eventually, he moved her body and disposed of the remains by tossing them off the York Bridge, where it was discovered by the custodian. Courtney is already serving a life sentence for taking his wife's life in 1983 and then burning their home down with his wife's body inside. Courtney demanded immunity from prosecution for what he did to Pamela, and then he'll tell them everything. It was discussed with Pamela's family, and then the offer was accepted. It's not really known, though, why Courtney decided to confess after all these years. Pamela's brother Jeff had this to say: "It's very emotional, of course, but it's been a relief and there is a certain amount of closure. I've been thinking about Pam every day for 53 years, and it's so hard to abruptly stop. But I woke up this morning and went, it's a new day. Things are different. It's great, I must say, that the confession was given and now we know what happened and how it happened," noted Jeff Dorrington. It is closure. 22-year-old Diana Hansen lived in Las Vegas, Nevada in 1983. She was a college student and was visiting her parents while on holiday break. At 4:30 p.m. on December 30th, she left her family's home to go on her daily jog. When she did not return, her parents got concerned and called the police. The next day, a construction worker stumbled upon a body in a desert area on West Spring Mountain Road. The body was quickly identified as Diana. The autopsy revealed that she had been indecently assaulted. Detectives were able to recover DNA from her body and preserve it for future use. Police also found signs of a struggle at the crime scene. They believed Diana had been abducted somewhere along her route and then driven to a second location. For the next 38 years, investigators from the Las Vegas Metro Police Department continued to work leads on the case. However, they were unable to identify a suspect. In August of 2021, investigators reached out to Ortham Incorporated, a Texas-based forensic sequencing lab, to request advanced genetic testing on a DNA sample taken from evidence left at the crime scene. After DNA testing was complete, they identified Johnny Blake Peterson, who was responsible for taking Diana's life. Dr. David Mattelman, the CEO of Ortham Inc., had this to say: "We were able to piece back together through the public records and family trees a plausible identity for who the donor of the DNA was. As Johnny is responsible for what happened to both Diana and Kim, Investigators are looking into the possibility that he has more victims. They already have a list of 5 similar cases that they believe he could be involved in. In 1986, a sanitation worker in Greenwich, Connecticut found the body of a newborn baby boy in his truck when he emptied a dumpster. An autopsy showed that the baby had been strangled and that he was less than a day old. Investigators interviewed people who lived close to the dumpster trying to find out who the parents are, but couldn't gather any useful information. DNA was just coming out of a very early science in 1986, so it was not advanced enough to find relatives of the baby at the time. In 2019, investigators from Greenwich Police Department took the DNA sample that they had from the baby and made use of genetic genealogy to find his family members. Using this method, they discovered a person who they believed was the mother of the baby. Investigators traveled to a house in Lake Mary, Florida, where they believe the woman now lives. They collected garbage and recycling left in the bin in front of the house. From these items, they got a DNA match. They showed that the woman is indeed the mother of the baby. The woman is 62-year-old Janita Phillips. Investigators decided to interview her. She then confessed. Janita said that she kept the pregnancy a secret to everyone. She gave birth to a baby boy in her apartment, strangled him, and then left him in a bag in the dumpster outside the building in Greenwich, Connecticut. Court documents show that back in 1986, Janita was interviewed, but then she denied any knowledge of what had happened and refused to take a blood test. In Janita's statement to the police, she wrote that she knew her husband did not want any more kids and had big dreams of becoming a fashion designer. Didn't want to crash his dreams and fall down the rabbit hole of having a bunch of kids and stuck with bills and not being able to care for them or get to achieve his dreams, reads the statement in part. DNA has also confirmed that Janita's husband is the father of the baby boy. According to her, he had no knowledge of what she did. Attorney Lindy Urso is representing Janita and says her client is devastated about that time of her life. She's overcome whatever happened here and she lived a stellar life. Never been arrested. This is her first time ever being arrested. She's raised a family, been married for all this time. She's been working steadily for 30 years in the same industry, Urso said. It seems like Lindy Urso does not have a problem with what Janita did. I find it quite ironic that Janita was caught because of her DNA. That she left in the trash matched the DNA of the baby boy she also left in the trash. Maureen Brubaker Farley was born and raised in Sioux City, Iowa. In 1971, when she was 17 years old, she moved to Cedar Rapids. Maureen wanted to be closer to her husband David, who was serving time in Anamosa State Penitentiary. She quickly found work at a diner in town. On September 17, 1971, Maureen was last seen buying a pack of cigarettes. Later that day, she failed to pick up her check from work. Then, on September 20th, when Maureen failed to show up at work, her employer reported her as missing. 4 days later, on September 24th, her body was found by 2 teenage boys in a wooded ravine near a landfill. Her body was on top of a trunk of an abandoned junk car. The 2 boys at first believed it was a woman sleeping, so they continued down the road to hunt. Upon returning to the abandoned car, they decided to take a closer look. It was then that they noticed the discoloration in her body. They ran back home to inform the police of what they had stumbled upon. An autopsy revealed she passed away from a skull fracture after being hit on the head. Investigators noted that there were clear signs that she had been carried and placed here at the crime scene after her life was taken elsewhere. At the crime scene, investigators were also able to collect DNA evidence belonging to the suspect. 6 months after her body was found, Maureen's mother wrote a letter to the Grand Rapids police saying that George Smith was responsible. George worked at the same diner where Maureen worked. He also worked at a liquor store near her apartment. Police interviewed him but did not have the evidence to charge him, or anyone else for that matter, so the case went cold. Recently, in 2021, the Cedar Rapids Police Department Cold Case Unit took another look at the case. They took the DNA found at the crime scene that belonged to the suspect and created a DNA profile. They then tested it to see if it matched the DNA of George Smith, and it did. The only problem was that Jackass passed away in 2013, at the age of 94. Maureen's younger sister Lisa said that she felt a lot of emotions, including relief and closure. She also said that she and her family are satisfied with the evidence. Whenever anybody would pass from this world, my mom said, well, now they're up in heaven with Maureen, and they must be happy. And they know the answers. I just didn't want to wait that long. I didn't want us to wait until we go to the next world. I wanted answers in this world. Police Chief Wayne Germain had this to say in a statement. No matter how much time has passed, our officers are committed to seeking out justice for all victims of violent crime, as well as their families. I am extremely proud of the generations of Cedar Rapids officers that contributed to bringing this once cold case to a resolution. Maureen's mother, Mary, now 86, revealed why she told the investigators back in 1971 that it was George Smith. He apparently asked investigators constantly about updates in the case. His work at the liquor store would also see him making a lot of trips to that landfill as part of a hauling service. Mary also had this to say about the fact that he can't be prosecuted. We just figure he'll suffer in hell for it. What's done is done, and at least we know it was him and we can quit wondering. We can let it go. The case of Sheila LaBarre, a monster with an angelic appearance, psychological and physical traumas received at an early age can have a very unpredictable effect on adult life. Of course, far from always, they lead to the fact that a person becomes cruel and seeks to hurt others. But sometimes it is the trauma can give rise to a real monster. Criminal psychologist Adrian Raine believes that there are genetic and psychophysical mechanisms that can turn a person into a cold-blooded killer, about which he wrote in detail in his book, Anatomy of Violence. History knows a lot of serial criminals who had a truly hellish childhood, and perhaps to them can be attributed our heroine today, Sheila LaBarre. This woman had an angelic appearance which she skillfully used, seducing her victims and then brutally murdered them. Despite the fact that the court was able to prove only 2 of her crimes, criminologists are sure that there were many more. And now let's look at this difficult story from the beginning and try to understand whether Sheila LaBarre was a born monster or became him as a result of the cruelty that she faced in childhood. Who is Sheila LaBarre? Sheila LaBarre was born in 1958, the 4th of July, in the small country town of Fort Payne, Alabama. She was the youngest of 3 children of her parents and was raised with her brother and sister, Lynn. Her childhood was spent in a picturesque but rather secluded place, on a farm nestled among cornfields. According to the memories of Lynn's older sibling, Sheila was an active, inquisitive, and open-minded girl with a creative streak. She liked to be in the center of attention, had a good voice and cute appearance, so perhaps, if her life had turned out differently, she would have become a famous actress or singer. But instead of bright posters, her name decorated the pages of criminal chronicles. The unimaginable cruelty of her father. The head of the family, Manuel Bailey, for many years suffered from alcohol addiction, although it would be more accurate to say that his addiction suffered from his entire family. He often went on binges, turning into a real beast who enjoyed abusing his wife and children. He insulted and humiliated them, beat them with anything that came to hand, could throw everyone out in the middle of the night in a downpour or frost, and locked himself in the house, not letting anyone inside. Mothers, daughters, and sons often had to spend the night in a barn or in the open air in the field. One day, when Manuel was once again in a drunken rage, he began throwing dishes and other objects at his family members. The mother tried to cover the children as best she could, but one of the flower pots thrown by her husband hit her youngest daughter, Sheila, in the head. Sheila suffered a serious concussion and a lifelong scar on her temple, which she painstakingly covered with her hair. But not even the insults and beatings were the worst thing that the sisters had to endure in their parents' home. According to the memories of Sheila and Lynn, Manuel from an early age forcibly inclined them to intimacy. The mother may have been aware of what was going on, but the subject was never broached. However, despite the nightmare at home, Sheila did well enough in school. She dreamed of leaving the farm as soon as possible and go to conquer the big city. The girl was quite ambitious and determined. She passionately wanted to realize her childhood dream in life and become an actress or pop singer, and she had everything for this: charisma, bright appearance, and a beautiful voice. Adulthood, first marriage. Barely Sheila was 18 years old. She left her parents' home, but adult life was not so joyful. To enter the university, she was not allowed to average score. And to move to the big city, she simply did not have the money. Then Sheila got a job as a maid in one of the hotels, where by that time her older sister was already working. It should be noted that Sheila had a slender figure and a very attractive appearance. She had big blue eyes, a charming smile, and a mop of thick long hair. She was surrounded by attention from men, and over time, she learned to use it and manipulate her suitors. In the late 70s, LeBar, then Bailey, met a guy named Jonathan Baxter, and a romantic relationship began between them. Jonathan was not yet 20 years old at the time, but he already had a young daughter from a previous relationship. However, the child did not become a hindrance, and soon the couple got married. However, this marriage lasted only a few months and collapsed after Jonathan learned that the young wife abused his daughter while he disappeared at work. Jonathan did not organize scandals and listen to explanations. He just filed for divorce and put his wife with his belongings outside his house. He never wanted to see or hear from her again. After the divorce, Sheila dated various men and mostly lived off them. But all these relationships were fleeting and lasted from a few weeks to a couple of months until in the early 80s, she met her future second husband, Ronnie Jennings. The tumultuous romance soon led to marriage, and Sheila took on a double last name, Bailey Jennings. It was an unhealthy relationship between two irascible and unstable people who regularly cheated on each other, scandalized, and even fought. Still, their marriage lasted more than 3 years. In 1984, after another family quarrel, demanded a divorce from her husband, but he refused her. In fact, Ronnie did not hold on to the relationship at all. He just wanted to piss off his wife and make her mad. And he succeeded. Sheila became hysterical, took a large number of drugs in front of her husband, drinking strong alcohol, and after this infernal cocktail, sat behind the wheel of the car and rushed down the road. Naturally, soon Sheila, under the influence of pills and alcohol, lost consciousness, flew off the road, and at high speed, crashed into a tree. She miraculously survived, but suffered a massive head injury. She spent more than a week in a deep coma, and doctors made no prognosis. When Sheila finally regained consciousness and gradually recovered, she was transferred to a psychiatric hospital where she spent several months. She later complained to her sister that one of the orderlies was constantly harassing her and possibly taking advantage of her helpless state when she was heavily sedated. After all this, Sheila returned to her second husband's home, but began to behave not just aggressively, but threateningly toward him. When during another scandal, she attacked Ronnie and poked him in the chest with nail scissors. Ronnie, fearing for his own life and health, filed for divorce and hurriedly moved out of the mad woman. Rich lover. When the second marriage was dissolved, the young woman began looking for lovers through the dating columns of the print media, and she left her ads there as well. But no man did not stay with her for long, because Sheila tended to dominate everything, rigidly suppressing their partners, both in intimate and everyday life. Soon the photo of an attractive girl in the dating section drew the attention of 60-year-old Wilfred Bill LeBar. The man had previously been married twice and had adult children and grandchildren from previous marriages. He was widowed a few years ago and had been living alone on his large country ranch ever since. Bill was a fairly wealthy man. He had a chiropractic office in Epping, New Hampshire, and on the ranch he raised horses. At the same time, he was very lonely and needed a strong, powerful woman. In fact, that's exactly what he found. Sheila was attracted by the wealth of her new acquaintance, and she decided that it would be an ideal union for her. And to make Bill completely lost his head, she began to send him a postal mail, frank letters, supplementing them with her nude photos. The trap worked, and soon, LeBar invited a charming pen pal to visit his ranch. Their romance developed rapidly. An elderly man is not stingy on expensive gifts for a young mistress, and in the summer of 1987, she moved to live with him. This has incredibly flattered the doctor, who now went out in public with a beautiful companion, who was half his age and was fit for him as a daughter. Nevertheless, he did not plan to marry Sheila. However, Sheila, not waiting for a marriage proposal, changed her name, calling herself Labar. Bill was surprised by this turn of events, but he did not object. Sheila began to interfere in all the affairs of her elderly lover, starting to control his business, finances, and disposition of his property. In addition, Bill was getting older and could not satisfy the intimate needs of a young woman. Then, according to Sheila herself, he allowed her to meet other men whom she often brought directly to their home. One of Sheila's regular lovers, closer to the mid-90s, was a Jamaican national named Wayne Ennis. He was much younger than Sheila and was initially hired as an au pair on the ranch. But soon the young man, with Bill's consent, which was probably given under pressure from Sheila, moved to live in the owner's house. In 1995, Sheila and Wayne officially legalized their relationship, and the spouse considered that from now on he would be. The couple continued their relationship online. Sherry sent photos of ultrasounds and her growing belly. "I just bulged out my belly. Jerry wanted to believe it so badly that I had no doubt he would see the pregnancy even if it wasn't there," Miller would later say. Soon on November 5, 1999, Jerry Cassidy received an email, presumably from Bruce Miller, in which he wrote that he knew about everything and would not let the bastards be born. A concerned Jerry tried to contact Sherry. Hours later, she texted him herself, informing him that she had to leave for a few days and that she would text him later. The next day, Jerry received a message from Bruce and learned that he had forced his wife to have an abortion. Attached to the letter were photos of a battered Sherry. "I remember standing in front of the mirror trying to draw bruises on my stomach." Sherry would later recount. Jerry had reached a tipping point. His children, not one but two twins at once, had been killed by Bruce Miller. He was again devastated and full of anger. He blamed Bruce for the deaths of his 3 children and the abuse of the woman he loved. After reconnecting with Sherry the next day, November 8th, Jerry said he couldn't go on like this. He would kill her husband. The couple set about devising a plan to kill him. They worked out routes, parking spots, and even the best place and time to get to the dump. Jerry then made the long drive from his home to Michigan. That same evening, as Bruce planned to leave work, he received a call from Sherry and, following the plan, asked if he could pick up a pizza on his way home. Distracted by the conversation, Bruce did not notice a man approaching him from behind, pointing his 20-gauge shotgun at him and pulling the trigger. After committing the crime, Jerry went home and Sherry began the next part of the plan. She called Bruce's brother Chuck, said she was very worried about her husband's long absence, and asked Chuck to drive to the junkyard and see if everything was okay. When Chuck got there, he found his brother dead on the floor in a pool of blood. He had been shot in the chest with a shotgun at close range. According to eyewitnesses, when Sherry learned of Bruce's death, she began screaming and crying. The crime scene was quickly discovered, but no trace or evidence of the suspect remained. Detectives learned that Bruce carried large amounts of cash, and they initially thought his death may have been the result of a botched robbery, as the dead man's wallet was missing. John Hutchinson, a friend and employee of Bruce's who had recently borrowed $2,000 from him, came under suspicion. Police questioned Hutchinson, searched his home, and confiscated weapons. John adamantly denied involvement. The search was inconclusive, and despite the fact that Hutchinson failed a polygraph test, he was eventually released. A theory of murder due to falsification of vehicle identification numbers was considered. However, none of the options did not give any leads, and soon the case was closed. Meanwhile, according to Bruce's sister, Judy Miller, Cherry's behavior did not fit most people's idea of a grieving spouse. 2 days after the death of her supposedly beloved husband, she was already dancing in a bar in Otisville, Michigan, and looked happy. 2 weeks later, she had a boyfriend, and it wasn't Jerry Cassidy, but a local delivery boy named Jeff Foster. The goal was accomplished. It was like Sherry had passed a level in a video game, and the former lover was no longer interesting. Jerry thought that after the murder, he would be with the woman he loved. After all, he killed for her. But that didn't happen. She began to distance herself, and a month after the murder, she moved her new boyfriend, Jeff Foster, into the house she used to share with her husband and completely severed her relationship with Jerry, leaving him devastated. It was probably at this point that Cassidy realized he had murdered an innocent man in cold blood and, naturally, Sheila chose an occupation to her liking. She became an operator of intimate phone services. Since she had a truly enchanting voice, men fell for the bait and offered to meet her in person. Among such guys was Kenny County, who at the time of their acquaintance was barely 24 years old. The young man was attractive in appearance, very good-natured and open. He had a low IQ level due to which he was very gullible. This was exactly the kind of guy LeBar was looking for. Kenny was very close to his mother, on whom he actually depended, but Sheila, with the help of clever manipulations, managed to break this connection and literally lure Kenny to herself. She made him an unforgettable night of love and promised that they would be like this all the time. The young man decided that he had met the woman of his dreams, about which he informed his relatives, and then moved to live in Sheila's house. But soon Sheila showed the guy her true face, having arranged for him a real torture room in one of the rooms. Each time intimacy inevitably turned into a brutal beating or something worse. Kenny's body was covered with bruises, abrasions, scratches, cuts, and burn marks, but he could not leave the house of the mistress who had completely subjugated his will. Sheila did not allow him to see and communicate with his loved ones, and his family could only guess what was happening to Kenny. The first alarm was raised by neighbors who periodically noticed the guy and were horrified by his sickly appearance. A few days before his disappearance, a local store clerk took a picture of the young man on her cell phone camera, and later this picture was attached to the case file in court. In the photo, Kenny's condition could be described as deplorable. He was very thin. There were huge bruises under his eye and on his cheek, and his nose was probably broken. Judging by the degree of healing, all these injuries had been inflicted at different times, which suggested that the guy had been brutally beaten for a long time. The contents of his cart were also alarming. He rolled 2 large canisters of fuel to the cash register, as it later turned out, for his own cremation. The store employees were so puzzled and even frightened by the guy's appearance that they decided to report him to the police for possible domestic violence. But this time, Sheila managed to get away with it, and they could not charge her with anything. Soon Kenny stopped contacting his family altogether, and when his worried mother arrived at LeBar's house, the owner behaved aggressively and advised to leave Kenny alone. All subsequent attempts ended similarly, at which point Kenny County's family filed a missing persons report with the police, indicating that he may be being held forcibly at the country ranch, a home crematorium, and gruesome findings. When police arrived at Sheila's home, she claimed that the young man no longer lived with her and claimed that Kenny had run away because his mother, whom he was allegedly terrified of, began visiting them frequently. As evidence, Sheila provided an audio recording in which she asks her lover if his own mother had attacked him, and he quietly gives an affirmative answer. It all seemed more than strange, and the very next day, an officer visiting Sheila secured a search warrant for the estate. Sheila had been on the police's radar many times before, and her name had been linked to another mysterious disappearance of a boyfriend. But over the years, Sheila had never been questioned, and her house and grounds had never been searched. When the police arrived, they did not find LeBar at home, but they did see several fires burning near the outbuildings. The fires looked strange and were made of improvised materials: a mattress, fragments of wooden furniture, hay, etc., all doused with a flammable mixture. One of the bonfires had bones in it that clearly looked like human remains. The squad requested reinforcements in the form of forensic experts, reporting all the findings. But that turned out to be just the tip of the iceberg compared to what they discovered next. Almost all over the house were found poorly washed traces of blood. It was so much that it seemed as if there had been a real massacre. It turned out that the blood belonged to at least 3 different people. The bones smoldering in the fire belonged to the missing Kenny. I remember hearing her scream, "No, Mommy, no, don't go." After that moment, the full implications of what I had done to Bruce, his friends, his family, Jerry, his friends, and his family hit me with full force. They will never see them again. Bruce was a great man, Sherry Miller wrote of her husband. He never hurt me or my children. All he did was love us. He wanted to adopt my children. He just wanted a family. The only man who loved me, and I ordered him killed. In 2022, Sherry gave a public interview to a popular TV station. She admitted that Bruce was not involved with the mob and never abused her. She admitted that she used makeup to fake bruises and faked ultrasound scans to manipulate Jerry. According to Sherry, she didn't do it for the money. She said that she was afraid Bruce would find out who she really was and felt that it would be easier for him to be killed than to learn the truth about her. Sherry admitted that she knew about Jerry's tendency toward depression and the briefcase of evidence, but was confident that she would talk herself out of anything and could manipulate the jury and the court. She was so convinced of this that she turned down a plea bargain that could have gotten her 15 years instead of a life sentence. According to Sherry, it took a public story to find peace with herself. It's still very hard for me to look in the mirror, realizing what I did. I've been waiting to tell the truth and hopefully get a sense of peace from it. Sherry Miller remains incarcerated at the Huron Valley Women's Complex in Michigan. She is not eligible for parole. Who in one voice called her a crazy, unstable, and extremely violent woman. And Wayne Annis, the third husband, said that the ex-wife repeatedly persuaded him to kill Mr. Labar in order to seize his property. But despite the defense's attempts to convince the court that Sheila was insane and in need of treatment, it was proven that she was aware of her actions at the time of her crimes. She was found guilty in July 2008 and sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of ever being released. All of her appeals were rejected. Sheila is now serving her sentence in Florida, at Homestead Correctional Facility, but he's not a murderer. During the final sentencing, excitement gripped the Eckerd parents. Judge Anthony imposed a sentence of 50 years in prison without parole. The parents were broken. One miserable day had taken 2 sons from them at once. The cold-blooded murder of an innocent man and even a brother is clearly beyond the bounds of adequate human response. In the biblical story, the brother-killer Cain was banished from paradise as punishment. But he solved the problem differently, eliminating the source of his remorse. Mary Pryor and her husband Leonard lived in Flint, Michigan. They owned Sweet Marie's candy store for many years before selling it. They then moved to Lennon, Michigan to retire. In 1990, Leonard passed away. In the years since his passing, Mary became a fixture in the small village. She was a devout Catholic and often attended church functions. Lennon residents remember seeing her walk from home to the town diner for lunch and dinner most days. On February 27, 1997, Michigan State Police canine teams, taking part in training in the area, found 88-year-old Mary's body in a wooded area near her residence. She had been beaten, strangled, and indecently assaulted. It was a crime that shocked the small Lennon community. Investigators collected DNA of the crime scene that belonged to the suspect. They also conducted hundreds of interviews to gain evidence in the case and followed up on dozens of leads. Quickly, they zeroed in on Michael Burr. He lived in a residence a short walk from Mary's house. Investigators took his DNA sample so that it could be stored, as DNA was not advanced enough at the time to confirm that his matched what was found at the crime scene. Unfortunately, investigators could not gather enough evidence to meet the probable cause standard necessary to charge him in the connection to the case. Recently, the Genesee County Police Department partnered up with Michigan State Police Crime Lab to finally help solve the case. In November of 2021, they were able to match the DNA found at the scene to that of Michael Burr. Genesee County Prosecutor David Layton said, "The DNA evidence shows a 1 in 1.9 octillion chance that Michael was not responsible for what happened to Mary. Ultimately, what we all want here is closure for the victims' families," he said. "We want closure because when you lose a loved one in such a brutal manner, it never goes away from, you never have a peaceful day when you can't stop thinking about it." Michael is currently being held in Genesee County Jail without bond. He is now scheduled for a probable cause hearing in Genesee County District Court on November 24, 2021, when prosecutors will lay out the evidence against him. Not much is known about the next case. 48-year-old Jose Rafael Lero lived in Brooklyn, New York in 1993. On August 17th, he had an argument with an unknown man. The man then fatally shot Jose. Thanks to witnesses, the man was identified as 20-year-old Luis Carmona. Luis fled to the Dominican Republic before he could be arrested. Recently, members of the New York Police Department were able to track down Luis's location. With the help of the local government and the FBI, Luis was arrested. He was then extradited to New York in February 2021. It has not yet been made public why the two men were arguing that fateful day. 17-year-old Patricia Moreno lived in Malden, Massachusetts in 1991. She lived with her foster family in an apartment on Henry Street. This included her foster mother, the mother's two teenage daughters, and a boyfriend of one of the daughters, Rodney Daniels. At 3 a.m. on June 20, 1991, police responded to a call from the apartment where Patricia lived. There, they found her face down on the fire escape with a single gunshot wound to the head. She was still breathing but seriously injured. Patricia was then rushed to the hospital, but sadly, succumbed to her injuries. Patricia's foster family and Rodney were all in the apartment at the time that Patricia got shot. Each of them claimed that they heard the shots, but did not see who the shooter was. Rodney claimed that he was asleep in an armchair in the living room when he was awakened by the sound of the shots. He then apparently walked to the fire escape and saw Patricia. The foster mother called the police after the investigators learned that Rodney possessed multiple handguns close to the time and had engaged in threatening behavior toward Patricia in the weeks before her life was taken. While many people were interviewed and leads were followed, no arrests were made and the case went cold. In 2020, the Middlesex County's DA's cold case unit reconstructed Patricia's position on the fire escape. The DA's office then wrote this in a statement. Based on the position of the entry wound and the downward trajectory of the bullet, the path of the bullet was consistent with having been fired by an individual standing in the area of the doorway to the apartment, where the victim had resided with her foster family and where Rodney had been staying that evening. Investigators then began re-interviewing witnesses and located a witness who had been out of the country for a while. That witness lived in the apartment just below Patricia's on the second floor. They said they'd been woken by a loud noise and immediately looked to the fire escape. They provided a description of the person they had seen there, which was consistent with Rodney's appearance. They also said the man immediately retreated into the apartment and closed the door. With the new information, investigators went ahead and obtained a warrant from Malden District Court. With the help of South Fulton Police in Georgia, they arrested Rodney at his home in late September of 2021. He was arraigned in Georgia as a fugitive from justice and is being transported back to Massachusetts. Middlesex District Attorney Marion Ryan had this to say, "After 3 decades, we have taken the first steps today to hold accountable the person we allege took Patricia's life. It is always with mixed emotions that we make these announcements, as we know this will not fill the void caused by the loss of a daughter, a sister, and a friend to many. I do hope that it brings hope to some of the families who are still awaiting answers. This is a case that was solved not by new development in forensic science, but as a result of relentless investigative work and a change in circumstances for some parties involved. We will never give up on a case. This case is emblematic of that. We know whenever we make these announcements, it's bittersweet. On one hand, we are finally able to hold someone accountable. On the other hand, it certainly brings back a well of memories, takes people back to probably what was one of the worst incidents in their lives. Investigators are now looking into the possibility that Patricia's foster family knew that Rodney took her life, but protected him for all these years. 68-year-old Robert Wong lived in Memphis, Tennessee in 2017. He was a retired military man, having worked as an Air National Guardsman. He had been diagnosed with cancer and was receiving treatment. On November 23, 2017, Robert was looking forward to spending Thanksgiving Day with his family, but he wasn't feeling well. His family then went out to an Asian restaurant for their Thanksgiving meal while he stayed at home. When his family returned home, they saw that his blue Honda Odyssey minivan was gone, which was odd because his illness stopped him from driving. His family then found Robert's body on the ground. He had been fatally shot. Because of his stolen vehicle, investigators believe that it was a robbery that went wrong. The vehicle was found the next day a few miles from his home, but there were no clues leading to a suspect. The case went cold until recently. New evidence and witness interviews led detectives to 19-year-old Dallas Perkins. He is currently serving a non-related 7-year prison sentence for aggravated robbery. Dallas was just 15 years old when he took Robert's life. In November of 2021, he was arrested and charged in connection to the case. He is charged as a juvenile and is now awaiting trial. 32-year-old Janet Love lived in Bedford, Texas in 1986. She grew up in a big family in Louisiana, but made her way to Texas when she found work as a ticket agent for Delta Airlines. On April 23, 1986, Janet was working the 3 p.m. to midnight shift at the Dallas-Fort Worth International Airport. Thereafter, she went home to her apartment in Bedford. The next day, on April 24th, she did not show up for work. 2 of her coworkers who were concerned made their way inside her apartment to check up on her. Inside her apartment, they found Janet's body. She had been indecently assaulted and shot. Investigators collected DNA evidence from her body that belonged to the suspect. They also interviewed a lot of people but did not gather any useful leads. Recently, the DNA was used to create a DNA profile. It was then submitted to the combined DNA index system, but no matches could be made. Investigators then decided to send the DNA to the University of North Texas in Denton County, where the school Center for Human Identification made use of genetic genealogy to identify the suspect. Finally, in September of 2021, they identified him as Ray Anthony Chapa. They also linked him to various other crimes. Investigators learned that he lived in a neighboring apartment complex less than 1,000 feet away from Janet. But as far as they could tell, Ray and Janet did not know each other before he took her life. Investigators are unable to arrest him as he passed away in January of 2021 from a terminal illness, but they are 100% sure that he would have been convicted if still alive. Janet's younger sister, Rebecca Roberts, had this to say: "It's probably best that he is not alive and that our family doesn't have to go through a trial and all of the roller coaster of emotions that would come with that. None of it's going to bring her back, but it is some sense of justice. Please say that Ray also lived in Montana and Chicago. It is very possible that he is involved in even more crimes. If you have any additional information, please call the Bedford Police Department at this number." 9-year-old Candace Rogers lived in Spokane, Washington in 1959. Her friends and family called her Candy. Candy was a member of the Campfire Girls, a youth group focused on outdoor activities. On March 6, 1959, she came home from school, played with her dog, ate a cookie, and then set out to sell campfire mints in her neighborhood. When Candy did not return by nightfall, her grandfather, mother, friends, and neighbors started to look for her. Over the next few days, thousands of people started searching for her. This included Marines, airmen, and military aircraft. Sadly, an Air Force helicopter involved in the search crashed and the 3 crew members passed away. On March 21, 1959, 15 days after Candy was last seen, 2 off-duty airmen hunting in the woods about 7 miles from her home noticed a pair of children's shoes. The 2 men informed the police about their finding. The next morning, when that area was searched, Candy's body was found. She had been indecently assaulted and strangled with a piece of her own clothing. It was a crime that rocked Spokane. Hundreds of tips came in, but investigators were unable to identify the person that took Candy's life. All they had was DNA of the suspect found at the crime scene. Sergeant Zach Stormont of the Spokane Police Department described the case in the following way: "But at the same time, nobody ever forgot." Recently, with advances in DNA technology, investigators were able to create a DNA profile from the evidence found at the crime scene back in 1959. They then made use of genetic genealogy and found a relative of the suspect. Investigators then interviewed the relative and took their DNA sample. Finally, in 2021, investigators revealed that they believe John Ray Hoff is the man who took Cindy's life. John grew up in Spokane and had a record of petty juvenile crime. When he was 17, he joined the Army and served in Korea. In 1959, when Candy's life was taken, he was 20 years old and lived about a mile from her home. In 1961, he was convicted of grabbing a woman and tying her up before strangling her. The woman survived and John served 6 months in jail. As a result of the conviction, he was discharged from the army. John then sold cutlery and worked in a lumberyard. He also married and had children. In 1970, at the age of 31, he took his own life. To make sure that John is responsible for the crime, investigators exhumed his remains. He was buried in the same cemetery as Candy. After some more DNA testing, it was confirmed that John is responsible in November of 2021. Investigators are not sure if John knew Candy, but they did find one connection. John's stepsister was also a campfire girl who served as Candy's big sister in the program. While the identification brought some relief to Candy's surviving relatives, it was agonizing for Sergeant Stormont to have to tell John's widow and 4 children that he is responsible for such a heinous crime. John's daughter Kathy, whose DNA was used to link her father to the crime, said that she felt disbelief, anger, and sadness to learn that her father had been identified as the suspect. She was 9 when he took his own life. It's just really sad to find out that someone, not even just your dad, but just someone in your family, could do something like that. I'm very sorry for what my dad did, that he took her life horribly. I hope that it gives her peace knowing that, even though it's not really justice because he doesn't get any punishment, but that his name has that on it now, and they can know it's solved. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.